Hi, Odyssey Recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a comedy movie named Spoiled Brats. Francis Bartek, a millionaire of Polish descent, moved to France and became successful in the construction business. Now a widower living in Monaco, he has two sons, Philippe and Alexander, and a daughter, Stella. None of them work and they rely on their father's money, living very spoiled lives. Alexander skips classes to sleep with women of all ages, Stella spends all her time shopping, and Philippe comes up with bad project ideas and neglects the tasks his dad gives him, preferring to party instead. All of them are also very rude to the servants and workers. One morning, Philippe comes to Francis' office with a very silly idea, hiring people to break in shoes before you wear them. Francis, who hasn't been able to discipline his kids since their mother died, says he'll think about it. However, his associate and close friend Ferruccio points out how ridiculous the idea is. Philippe leaves after Francis gives him a package to deliver for the company, and Ferruccio scolds Francis for not being stricter with his family. He says that using their mother's death as an excuse is no longer valid, it's been 15 years and they're adults now. Meanwhile, at the Bartek mansion, Stella's birthday party has already started. Her lazy Argentine boyfriend, Juan Carlos, entertains the guests with stories about his homeland and repeatedly declares his love for Stella, while she gets increasingly annoyed by the lack of juice. She goes to the kitchen to yell at the staff but is interrupted by Matthias, an old acquaintance who is working with the catering service. He immediately points out that she's only happy to see him because he'll be working for her all night. Francis spends some time in his home office before joining the party, talking to a portrait of his wife and wondering where he went wrong. He gets offended when his housekeeper, Marguerite, tells him he's depressed. He finally leaves the room when he hears a commotion outside and finds Juan Carlos trying to open an expensive bottle of vintage champagne by throwing a golf ball at it, which ends up breaking the bottle. Obviously, he's failed, but instead of accepting the responsibility, he blames the waiter holding the bottle for moving. Afterwards, he and Stella ask to talk to Francis in private. So, Francis takes them back to his office and listens to them while cleaning his shotgun. Francis clearly doesn't approve of Juan Carlos and makes this known when he hears Juan Carlos wants to marry Stella. He also points out that Juan Carlos will be using Francis' money instead of his supposed wealth in Argentina. Stella gets angry and reminds Francis that he's always been an absent father. She clarifies that she's not asking for permission to get married, she's just letting him know before she and Juan Carlos storm out of the room to continue partying. While Stella announces her engagement to the entire party, which upsets her best friend, Francis receives a call from Ferruccio. Ferruccio tells him that, as suspected, Philippe never did the chores they asked him to. Instead, Philippe went to a party, as confirmed by a video he's posted on social media. At that moment, the principal of Alexander's school arrives at the house, upset because Alexander has been missing classes but also for sleeping with his wife. Alexander comes down the stairs, followed by both of the principal's daughters because he's also been sleeping with them. The principal tells Francis he's sorry he let Alexander come to the school as a favor, especially after everyone else said no. Then, he chases Alexander around the house. Seeing all his kids in trouble like this adds to Francis' stress, and he ends up having a heart attack. Later, Francis wakes up in the hospital with Ferruccio at his side. His children come too, but instead of being thoughtful, they start arguing over silly stuff. This makes Francis' heart rate increase again due to stress, as shown by the heart monitor. Ferruccio kicks them all out before asking Francis if he believes their mother would approve of their behavior. 2 months later, the three siblings rush to the house, worried about their father after finding their credit cards and phones blocked, with no Wi-Fi available. Suddenly, a group of police officers arrives, surrounding the house and seizing their cars, citing a search warrant. Francis appears with a shotgun and instructs his children to follow him for a stealthy exit from the house. Once they reach the road, he stops a passing driver by brandishing his weapon, and the family commandeers the car to flee the area. However, as soon as they're out of sight, Ferruccio emerges next to the driver and compensates him for his assistance. On their way to Marseille for safety, Francis reveals that the company is in trouble due to some funds being mishandled. As a result, their accounts have been frozen, and they're now facing accusations of fraud from the authorities. The prime suspect is Ferruccio, who vanished the day before. Francis insists they keep quiet about their situation until it's resolved. To prevent tracking, he tosses their cell phones onto the street. Upon reaching Marseille, the siblings are shocked by the modest living conditions of the middle and lower class. Their dismay deepens when Francis brings them to their accommodation, his childhood home, which has seen better days. Several light bulbs are out, and they'll have to share a bed, but it'll suffice for the time being. During dinner of fried bread, Francis breaks the news to his children that they need to find work to make ends meet. The following morning, Francis rouses them at 6 a.m. to begin their job hunt while he remains at home, addressing the household issues to avoid being recognized by the police. Having been the provider for so long, now it's their turn to provide for Francis. Getting ready to go out proves to be quite a challenge too. The tap water is murky, and the sink is uncomfortably close to the toilet without a dividing door. Stella resorts to spraying perfume on herself while Philippe, lacking toilet paper, watches as he finishes up. Alexander attempts to find work at a construction site but ends up getting kicked out by workers after stealing their lunch. They direct him to speak with their boss if he wants employment. Meanwhile, Stella disregards her father's instructions and borrows a phone from a passerby on the street. She uses up all of the man's phone minutes to call Juan Carlos and inform him that she's on vacation with her family. Philippe visits a friend who has always backed his ideas, hoping to secure some financial support. However, his friend confesses that he finds Philippe's ideas silly and only pretended to support them for amusement during their parties. A few hours later, Alexander and Philippe come back home empty-handed from their job hunt. Stella returns as well, but with expensive clothes bags in tow. It's revealed she sold Philippe's watch for money, but instead of purchasing food, she went shopping. The siblings start arguing, and in retaliation, Philippe pours soap all over Stella's new clothes. Their squabble is interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Marguerite and Matthias, whom Stella had called earlier. Marguerite and Matthias arrive, bearing towels and clothes for the family. Matthias offers Stella a job interview at the restaurant where he works. Marguerite attempts to give them some of her savings, but Francis declines, insisting she keep her money. He asks her to leave, but not before making her promise not to divulge their situation to anyone. The following day, Stella begins her trial period as a waitress at the restaurant. She struggles to balance the tray and accidentally drops items, but she agrees to wash dishes and assist with fish gutting without much complaint. Dealing with the demanding customers proves challenging, and it takes her some time to memorize the table assignments and swiftly take orders from multiple patrons. Meanwhile, Philippe visits a job agency where the clerk is surprised to learn he lacks experience or qualifications. Philippe, however, requests a senior management position with a high salary and perks, all under the table due to his legal issues. After persuading him to adjust his salary expectations, the clerk arranges a job for him as a bike taxi driver, which proves challenging due to Philippe's weight. Due to his sluggish pace on the bike, Philippe loses all his clients to his rival driver, Malik. Meanwhile, Ferruccio pays a clandestine visit to Francis, bearing expensive wine and lobsters. Initially hesitant to indulge, Francis worries about being unfair to his children but eventually relents and enjoys the feast. When Francis mentions his plans to stay occupied by repairing the house, Ferruccio questions whether he's truly doing it solely for the sake of his siblings. Suddenly, they hear noises from the house and grab the shotgun to investigate, only to discover that Alexander, instead of job hunting, has stayed in and slept all day. Francis hastily sends Ferruccio away and tries to clean the dishes before his son sees them, but it's too late. Alexander finds him and recognizes the lobster shell. Thinking on his feet, Francis tells him he caught the lobster while fishing, which Alexander believes, remarking that nature always provides. At the end of the day, Philippe and Stella bring home some money, which Francis splits between food and house repairs. When they learn that Alexander spent the day making a hammock and sleeping, they become angry and refuse to share dinner with him. Alexander declares he doesn't need them and goes off to forage for acorns, apples, berries, and other fruits from the bushes and trees around the house. However, the food he consumes ends up making him sick later on. The next day, Francis offers Alexander the opportunity to earn a share by assisting him in repairing the house. Alexander questions why Francis never sold the house before, given that they didn't use it previously, but Francis simply responds that it holds sentimental value. At the restaurant, Stella engages in an argument with a customer who is extremely rude to her because his dish is missing an ingredient. Upset, she considers quitting and expresses her frustration to Matthias in the kitchen. Matthias points out that Stella has often treated waiters poorly in the past, so she shouldn't be surprised to receive similar treatment now. Stella comes to terms with reality and chooses to stay and adopt a humble attitude. As a reward, Matthias reveals to her the consequences for rude customers: the cooks spit in their food. Encouraged by this insight, Stella begins to work even harder, willingly taking on tasks like cleaning floors and washing dishes as needed. In the evening, after dinner, the siblings argue about who will wash the dishes, and Philippe accidentally reveals that Stella used to struggle with anorexia. Francis is stunned by this revelation and questions why she didn't seek his help. The siblings point out that Francis has always been an absent father, highlighting the moments he missed due to work. Stella's year-long battle with bulimia, Alexander's night in jail for possession of marijuana, and Philippe's 2-week hospitalization for peritonitis, during which Francis never visited because he was on a business trip in Japan and refused to cancel it. Feeling as though he's being put on trial, Francis exits the room, asserting that he can't be held responsible for all their troubles. The next day, Philippe grows weary of Malek continuously snatching his clients and decides to confront him. Initially, their exchange escalates into an argument, and it seems like a physical altercation might ensue. However, they unexpectedly bond over their shared passion for collector sneakers, transforming their confrontation into a budding friendship. Meanwhile, back at the house, Alexander demonstrates his plumbing skills by fixing the pipes, much to Francis' surprise and admiration. When Francis questions how Alexander acquired such knowledge, Alexander reveals that in high school, he and his friends pulled a prank by redirecting the waste pipe into the principal's shower. As a consequence, Alexander spent 2 months immersing himself in plumbing tutorials to rectify the situation. Back in Monaco, Juan Carlos is involved with Stella's best friend, who confides in him about rumors circulating regarding the family's financial woes and the possible culprit behind them. Juan Carlos finds this information suspicious, especially since he spotted Ferruccio at the country club just 2 days prior. Determined to uncover the truth, he resolves to launch an investigation. Later in the day, Francis offers his apologies for the kind of father he's been, expressing how challenging it was for him to suddenly assume the roles of both father and mother. He explains that they had kept their mother's illness a secret to shield them from pain. The siblings feel their father views them as spoiled and naive, but Francis reassures them that he's now proud of who they've become. They then enjoy a delightful evening together under the stars, reminiscing with drinks and sharing stories from their youth. The family begins to settle into their new life together, tackling chores and renovations around the house while cherishing their time together. Stella forms strong bonds with her colleagues at the restaurant, finding camaraderie among them. Meanwhile, Philippe learns valuable insights from Malek on improving his skills as a bike taxi driver, and they collaborate to generate income through Malek's collection of rare trainers. Ferruccio contacts Francis, urging him to end the charade because Juan Carlos has been investigating. However, before Francis can act, Juan Carlos arrives at the house a few hours later, having uncovered Francis' deception by trailing Ferruccio. Francis offers to pay any sum Juan Carlos desires in exchange for him leaving them alone, but Juan Carlos refuses, expressing his desire to assist them instead. When the siblings arrive, Juan Carlos informs them that he has sold his properties in Argentina to settle the family's debts, granting them access to their accounts and the mansion once more. Reluctant to let his children discover his deception and wanting to teach them a lesson, Francis goes along with Juan Carlos' charade and agrees to return to Monaco. As they journey back to their home, Juan Carlos suggests they can finally marry, and Stella tentatively agrees to kiss him, though she appears more hesitant than before. The following day, over breakfast, Francis confides in Marguerite about his guilt and concern regarding Stella's relationship with Juan Carlos. Marguerite urges him to come clean. Later, when Francis discusses his dilemma with Ferruccio, his friend echoes Marguerite's advice. Realizing he can't avoid it any longer, Francis resolves to speak to his children. However, sensing that Francis might reveal the truth at any moment, Juan Carlos decides to take matters into his own hands and elopes with Stella. Despite Stella's reservations, Juan Carlos promises her a proper celebration later on. As they arrive at the city hall, Francis attempts to contact Stella, but Juan Carlos intercepts the call and answers, feigning a pleasant conversation while ignoring Francis' angry protests. After abruptly ending the call, Juan Carlos assures Stella that her father supports their union. Meanwhile, Francis seizes the opportunity to gather his sons and rushes to the city hall in a bid to halt the wedding. As the wedding ceremony begins, Stella is startled to learn that Juan Carlos' real name is Kevin Leputer. He offers her a flimsy explanation, claiming that his father, a refugee, had to change their surname. Despite her doubts, Juan Carlos persuades her to proceed with the marriage. However, before they can exchange vows, Stella's family intervenes. Francis reveals the truth to Stella, informing her that Juan Carlos Kevin only seeks her wealth and that the story about him selling his properties to rescue them is false. The family was never in any financial peril, it was all a fabrication concocted by Francis to impart a lesson to their children. The police officers who appeared at their house that day were actually paid actors. Enraged by Juan Carlos's deception, Stella slaps him before storming out of the room, followed by her siblings. None of them have any desire to speak to their father again. 9 months pass, and Francis still hasn't received any communication from his children, except for the monthly checks they send him for residing in his childhood home. However, he has never cashed any of them, opting instead to keep them in a glass bowl as a reminder. After a business meeting with clients, Ferruccio feigns a driving error and takes a different route, inadvertently leading them to Francis' old house. In the trunk, there are also flowers intended for Francis to present to Stella on her birthday. Upon entering the house, Francis observes how well his children are doing. Philippe and Malek are successful in their trainer business, Alexander has found employment as a plumber, and Stella and Matthias are embarking on their own restaurant venture. However, the atmosphere becomes tense as Francis arrives, and he senses the discomfort among his children. Understanding their unspoken feelings, he simply hands Stella the flowers and expresses his remorse once more before preparing to depart. Moved by their father's sincerity, the siblings ultimately decide to forgive him. They call him back inside and invite him to stay, embracing the opportunity to celebrate together as a reunited family. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.